folks a little bit about you and where you're from and why you're running for the nomination for U.S. Senate. And we'll give you, for the opening statement, we'll give you 5 minutes. In the interest of time here this evening, we want to hear from you. We want to give you enough time to also speak about yourself. And if that microphone's not going to work, I'll give you mine, so we can just get this going. So we'll start. What we're going to do first is we're going to do opening statements in forward ABC order, my last name, and closing statements the other way. So Darrell Freitas, we'll let you go first, and then Chairman Storm next.
Well, again, thank you all very much for having me down here. I really appreciate it. I'll just tell you a little bit about myself real quick. So my name is Nick Freitas. I'm currently in the Virginia House of Delegates. I represent Culpeper, Orange, and Madison County. I'm very proud to do so in the House of Delegates. I'm married to my wife, Tina. We met in high school. The secret to marrying someone way out of your league is you meet them when they're 19, and then you convince them you're the best that they can do, and that's what I did to her. And 19 years later, we're still together. We have 3 children. My oldest daughter, Lily, is 15. My son, Luke, is 12. And my youngest daughter, Allie, is 10. Right out of high school, I joined the military. Enlisted in the 82nd Airborne Division as an infantryman, served in the 25th Infantry. After 9/11, I volunteered for Special Forces, better known as Green Berets, and served 2 combat tours over in Iraq. That's really what I thought I was going to do for the rest of my life. I love being in Special Forces. I love being a Green Beret. But in 2008, something interesting happened, and that's when Barack Obama got elected. And I was sitting in Iraq, watching as my fellow countrymen cheered on this candidate who wanted to fundamentally change the nation. And what he meant by that was he wanted to fundamentally change who we are as a people and who we are as a country. And you have to understand, as a veteran and as someone at that point who was an active duty military service member overseas serving my country, what it felt like to have the future commander-in-chief saying that he wanted to change fundamentally who we were as a people. Because I'll tell you this much, the fundamentals are the Constitution. It's the Declaration of Independence. The fundamentals are not what's wrong with this country. Our failure to live up to them sometimes, sure, but not the fundamentals. And we're one of the few militaries in the history of the world that swore an oath, not to a sovereign. We swore it to a document. We swore it to a set of ideas and principles around individual liberty, around free market economics, around equal justice before the law. That's what we swore our oath to. And now my commander-in-chief was going to fundamentally change that. And that's when I realized that the battle for hearts and minds was not really going on in Iraq. The battle for hearts and minds was taking place back here in my country. And so my wife and I committed at that point that we were going to get involved in some way, shape, or form. And running for elected office was not the original plan. But it happened as I became a unit chairman in Culpeper County, as we started fighting back, as we started coming in contact with more people that believed the way we did about this. And as I got into General Assembly and I started carrying conservative legislation, conservative bill after conservative bill after conservative bill, I had more and more, I had people tell me, well, Nick, you can't do that. Why? Well, because the federal government has a regulation. Really? Will you show me under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution where the federal government has that authority? And they couldn't answer me, but they kept obstructing and kept obstructing. I kept having to find ways to go around them and fight them. So the bottom line is the reason why I'm running for the United States Senate is not because I've had a passion to be a politician all my life. I still don't see myself as a politician. The reason what I'm doing is the same reason I went to Iraq. It wasn't because I wanted to go to war, it's because that's where the fight was. And now the fight's in Washington, D.C. And because I believe in this country, and quite frankly, I am tired of Republicans being caricatured by the left like we're evil or bigoted or selfish or xenophobic or whatever else it may be. Because ultimately, this is a contest between 2 philosophies, Tim Kaine and the philosophy of control, and us and the philosophy of liberty. We believe what we do. We believe what we do because fundamentally, we love the individual, and we believe that the government is there to protect their liberty so they can be everything that God intended them to be. That's why I'm going to Washington, D.C., to fight against Tim Kaine's philosophy of control and to once again convince the American people and Virginians to fall in love with the concept of liberty and everything it means to be a Virginian and to be an American. Thank you very much.
Mic check. We had a little forum earlier on today in Richmond, and my mic was always going out. So that was probably a good thing for you, Nick. But anyway, look, it's great to be here in Washington County. You know why? Because last June, you gave me 67% of your vote, and thank you very, very much for all of that. I had a lot of help. a lot of them are sitting right here at this table. Lynn Rash, Jack Morgan, Tamara, Flux, and all of you, by the way, at this table. Yeah? And I just want to thank you all. Now look, folks, it's going to be a very, very tough election. There's no question about it. But I do want to talk a little bit about, how to win this race. And I can tell you how not to win a race. You don't win a race by backing down on your conservative ideals. You don't win a race by backing down on controversies. You don't win a race by backing down on protecting your heritage and your history and protecting your historical monuments. You don't win a race by backing down on illegal immigration. And you don't win a race by distancing yourself from one of the greatest presidents we've had, President Donald Trump. I stood strong in all of those issues. And the establishment has always said, Corey, you're too conservative, you're too conservative. You know how many times I've heard that? The first time I think I heard it was in 2007, when I led the nation's toughest crackdown on illegal immigration in Northern Virginia. And I'm directly elected as the chairman. That's 465,000 residents. I'm one of only 3 of the directly elected chairmen in Virginia, Fairfax, Prince William, Loudoun counties. We're the second largest locality in the state. It's a 55% majority minority county. Hillary Clinton won it, unfortunately, by 21 points. But I am the only Republican since 2009 who has won countywide in Prince William County in Northern Virginia, not once, not twice, but 4 times by increasing margins, beating every single Democrat I've ever faced. That's what we're going to do in this election. Because Tim Kaine is not a nice guy. He may pretend to be, but he's not. And there's a lot of examples of this, and a lot of that is going to come out. And I'm going to leave you with one example. Some of you may know that in Minneapolis, a few months ago, his son, a member of Antifa, took pepper spray and sprayed it in the faces of elderly Americans who were waiting to get into a Donald Trump rally. Now, anybody can have a problem with their kid. I get that. I got 2 of my own, and they're not always perfect. And neither was I when I was young. But if that were to happen to your child, you would say, you know what, you did something wrong. You need to make up for it. You need to face the consequences. Well, what Tim Kaine said a lot more about Tim Kaine than about his son. Because he said, I'm proud of my son for being involved in politics. That is the person who we are up against. And it's going to take a lot of hard work. It's going to take a lot of work, and especially here in Southwest Virginia. We need all your votes. We need a really very, very, very high turnout. I am confident that we can do that. I am confident that we can do that by standing up for our values and by standing with our president and winning and taking back Virginia this year. And just so I have a nice ride home, I did want to introduce my wife of 24 years. She isn't able to go with me all the time, but that's my wife right back there, my wife Maria. Thanks a lot, everybody. I look forward to this. By the way, I saw a couple of the other candidates yesterday. I know that they couldn't make it. I know that they wanted to, but there are 4 or 5 of us in this race. They're all good gentlemen, including Nick. May the best man win, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to take back Virginia. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you, Barry. Now we'll get into the question and answer portion of the forum. What I'll do is ask a question and then go to both candidates, and you'll have 2 minutes to respond. We'll keep time, and I believe back in the back corner, Beth Stockman will be keeping time over there, so she will indicate when 2 minutes is up. And excellent, and we'll move on to let the other candidate respond, and then we'll go to the next question is how we'll work on this. So our first question is, what makes you think you would make a good U.S. Senator? We'll start with, just to work in our order here, we'll start with Delegate Freitas, 2 minutes.
No, thank you very much. I think what it comes down to is this. So serving in Army Special Forces, what we do as Green Berets, it's unconventional warfare and counterinsurgency. which I can't believe how well that's prepared me for domestic politics. but here's what it comes down to. It's not just about this race. All right, it's about how the Republican Party conducts itself going forward. Because when Ronald Reagan was president, people didn't vote for Republicans because they were afraid of the other side. They voted for Republicans because they were inspired. Because we reminded people, again, what it was to actually embrace liberty and to be able to live your life to the fullest. So as I look at my record, both within my military service, because when we serve at the federal level, the primary function of the federal government is national defense. That's the primary purpose, and I've been on the front lines in the war on terrorism. I understand what it takes to fight on that level. The other thing is my experience within the legislature. I have fought within the Virginia General Legislature for 3 years now. I've gotten good bills passed. People always say, how can you be as conservative? Because I have an A rating across the board from American Conservative Union, BCDL, NRA, Family Foundation, you name it. When I ran for re-election in my district, I actually had people cross the aisle to come and vote for me. And the reason why was not because I was a squish on my principles, because Corey's right about that. You don't win by abandoning your principles. You win by finding ways to be able to bring people over on the issues that you actually agree with and get something done. But the number one reason why I think I should go to the United States Senate is because I understand that one of the biggest problems we have in this country right now is complete and total federal overreach and interference into our lives. And our primary responsibility needs to be to work with Donald Trump in order to make sure that the federal government stays within its proper constitutional boundaries.
Well, I think there's, in politics, I think probably the number one trait that is missing among leaders today, especially among conservative leaders, and that is the trait of courage. It's something we haven't talked about a lot in this country, but it's absolutely so important because we have all these pressures from the media, from the Democrats, and yes, from people within our own party, establishment Republicans who frankly are afraid of losing their seats. They're afraid of losing elections. It's much more important to them to get reelected than it is to stand up and do the right thing. You have to have the guts to stand up for what you believe. And sometimes that means standing up to people inside of your own party. And folks, that's what I've done. That's my whole history. I grew up, my political life anyway, in the Democratic cauldron of Northern Virginia. And it hasn't been easy. It's been nasty. And I've been through the grinder. And if you ask my wife, once upon a time I used to be a nice guy. But I got a little tougher. And you've got to stand up. When I led the crackdown on illegal immigration 10 years ago, by the way, so far we've handed over 8,000 criminal illegal aliens over to ICE for deportation. Called every name in the book, everything you can possibly imagine. And it wasn't always easy. We got death threats. And then just recently, as the left, they talk about, hey, after every single massacre, every single school shooting, the left takes advantage of that. They play on your emotions. They exploit these poor children and families who have been so harmed by this. Their lives ruined. But what we need to do is understand this. We need to understand, and we need to make it very, very clear. The only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun.
Amen.
So this year, I'm leading an effort, and I'm taking a lot of grief for it. But we will be the first locality, and this is what I want to do for everybody. Is that time up?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's expired.
And that is, we will be the first to hire retired police officers in our schools to protect our kids. That is what we have to do, and let's bring in the veterans too. Thanks a lot.
Okay, our second question, same rules apply. It'll be a 2-minute response for each of you, and we'll go in reverse order this time. Question 2, we'll start with Chairman Stewart. What would you propose to give more control of education back to the state and local government from the federal level?
Sorry, say that again.
What would you propose to give more control of education back to the state and local government from the federal government?
Well, let's be clear. Ever since the Department of Education was created, the quality of education in this country has gone down. So the very first thing that I would do is eliminate and get rid of the United States Department of Education. And here's another thing too, folks. Do you know why we have to devolve and take all the federal authority out of this, take it all out, give it back to the states? Because in the states, you know, they're closer to the people. They know what works, what doesn't work. They're much more efficient, but there's one more thing that we can do on the state level. And I really believe this. We need to bring God back into our schools.
Amen.
All these shootings, folks, it's not because of guns. We had more guns per capita in the 1950s than we do today. How many of you went to schools where you would bring your gun or your rifle to school to do some hunting afterward? I know there are folks in here who used to do that. Well, of course, Will did. It is caused by deep problems within our families. Because we have taken God out of our schools and God out of our lives, our culture is disintegrating. And it is time to stand up. And this is why I go back to the thing that's so important. You have to have the guts to stand up, because one thing Republicans haven't been doing since the 1960s is we've been backing down on all of these cultural issues. And I don't think it's a coincidence either that our culture began to degrade with a horrible decision that has cost 50 million lives. We have to overturn Roe versus Wade.
So we're dealing with the same question to that.
Sure. So with respect to education, yeah, again, show me under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution where the federal government has any authority over education. If you can find it, please show me where, because I don't see it anywhere in there. And that's really what this comes down to. Unfortunately, when we talk about getting rid of the Department of Education, the left caricatures us as, well, you don't care about education. They hear Department of Education and they say education. We see the Department of Education for what it actually is, a bureaucratic nightmare that takes money out of localities only to give a portion of it back with a bunch of strings attached, which burdens our teachers, burdens our students, and produces a far less quality educational experience. So we need to get the federal government out of education, not because Republicans don't care about education, but because we do. And when you leave that money, don't take the money to the federal government and then give it back in a block grant or do something else. Get the federal government out of it, leave the money in the locality where it belongs in the first place. And then at the state level, and this is something I fought for, we need to give people more options over their own educational outcomes. Our educational opportunities should be as diverse as the students that they serve. But unfortunately right now, we have a government monopoly over education. And can anyone think of many things that the government does well? Because I can't. Maybe national defense, law enforcement, good job. But when it comes to trying to micromanage education, they have done a complete disservice. And we have more and more students growing up in an educational environment where, quite frankly, they're indoctrinated to believe that the government is there to provide their every need. Right? And we're not educating our students in a way that's actually going to prepare them to compete in a 21st century economy. So we have failed our students, and the reason why we have, a large reason why we have, is because once again, the federal government has gone way beyond their constitutional boundaries and stuck its nose where it absolutely does not belong. So we need to pull all of that back. And with respect to the cultural issues, we can look at that as well, because I grew up in a broken home. I know what that's like. And when I brought that up on the floor of the General Assembly, I got told it was racially insensitive. So my response back was, okay, well, I grew up in a broken home. Can I just give a list to the can I just give a list to the Democrats of my personal experiences that I'm allowed to talk about without them getting offended? That'd be great. So get the federal government out of education, keep that money back in the districts where it belongs.
Our next question, we'll start with Delegate Freitas on this one to get 2 minutes. Yes. So the question about Southwest Virginia, if elected, what will you do to help the communities in Southwest Virginia? 2 minutes.
I'll tell you what, I've voted for, Will Moorfield had a great bill this year in the General Assembly that's going to create essentially a tax zone within Southwest Virginia that's going to allow for a lot more economic development in this area. And here's what I loved about it, because it was massive tax cuts for Southwest Virginia. I loved hearing Democrats go, well, we want that too. It's like, oh, you mean you're admitting now that tax cuts actually spur on economic development? That overregulation actually crushes economic economic development? Well, welcome aboard. All right, so that's one of the things we've done at the state level. I'll tell you what we need to do. One of the biggest things at the federal level is I was running in my last election last year where I beat my opponent by 62%. He actually got up and he said, the coal industry is dying, just let it die. And I said, no, the coal industry isn't dying, it's being murdered by Washington, D.C. That's the difference. So one of the number one things that we can do right now is to, again, you want to talk about other organizations that probably shouldn't exist. The EPA has caused more damage to the Virginia economy, especially in this part of the state, in this part of the Commonwealth, because we've got an organization run by a bunch of people that have never been to a coal mine, never flown over, or never been to a farm. They've just flown over it. But because they have a PhD in, I don't know, multiculturalism somewhere, they think they're now infinitely qualified to tell the rest of us how we should manage our own resources in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So again, the answer seems to be the same thing. You want local control or you want federal control? I want local control. And so we need to remove the federal government from constantly interfering and purposely keeping the Democrats from purposely destroying industries that they don't understand simply because they have a bias because they don't understand the area. So that's one of the number one things I would do right off the bat is completely rein in the EPA and allow localities to have more control over their own regulatory environment so the businesses can once again flourish in this part of the country.
I remember the eve of the election in 2016, and Lynn Rash and I were out door knocking right down here in Southwest Virginia for a great president, President Donald Trump. And, you know, he promised he was going to do something, and he's accomplished it. The war on coal is over. And the reason we know this, for the first time in many years, instead of losing jobs in the coal industry, because of the reductions and all these unnecessary regulations, not just by the EPA, but by the Army Corps of Engineers and other departments and other agencies, is because President Trump has been able to reduce those regulations, and now we've reached a turning point. We're no longer losing jobs in the coal industry. In 2017, there were 1,001 additional new jobs in the coal industry than there were in 2016. We've turned that corner. But it's not just about the coal industry, is it? Because there's one thing that we need to get accomplished, and yes, there's a federal role in this. Because it's important not just to Virginia, not just to Southwest Virginia, but the entire country. And that is, we need to build out the Coalfields Expressway. I would note this, and I think this is going to come back later, but in other industries as well, you travel across not just Southwest Virginia, but Southside Virginia and across the country, and you get off the highway a little bit, and you know what you find? You find once thriving industrial centers that are now ghost towns. And you know what the reason for a lot of that is? Because of unfair trade agreements that were negotiated years ago that are emptying out America's industry. And what we need to do is stand with the president, put our foot down, put the hammer down, renegotiate those deals, and bring back industry all over the Commonwealth of Virginia.
The next question, and we'll go to Chairman Stewart first for 2 minutes. School safety is an important topic of discussion lately. If you're elected U.S. Senator, what actions would you take to ensure the safety of our children in our schools?
I think we need to get rid of gun-free zones.
Amen.
I know that's not really the correct thing to say, but let me tell you something. You know what a gun-free zone means? It means that the good guys don't have guns. That doesn't stop. And what bizarre world do the liberals live in, where they think that a sign on a school that says gun-free zone is going to stop a murderer from going into that school? It doesn't work. It simply doesn't work. And we know this. And so here's what we need to do on the federal level. We need to make it optional for the localities. We're going to have to force the states to do this. We have to protect our kids. Leave it up to the localities to do this. If you want to bring in retired police officers and veterans. Why veterans? Because veterans, you know how to use a firearm. You know how to do it safely. You know not to back off. You know how to stand up. And that's what we've got to do. And yes, I believe, and I support President Trump, that we need to allow those teachers who are trained, who are willing and comfortable with a firearm to do concealed carry inside those schools, because not only is that going to stop a murderer, it may not stop the first couple of shots, but it's going to certainly limit the damage. But it's also going to send the message that don't come into a school and think that nobody's going to be shooting back. We have to eliminate the idea of schools being soft targets, and that's what we've got to get done, and I'm going to do that.
Let me tell you a little bit about what we've done in Virginia about this, because the states are the ones that are responsible for addressing this problem in the primary motive, right? So we actually passed legislation last year that the majority of Democrats opposed, and that was allowing retired law enforcement to be able to go in and augment the school resource officer program so that school districts could hire additional armed personnel. Now it's funny, when we were debating this, the Democrats got up and said, I don't think more guns in schools is the answer. Like, really, I find that fascinating, because every time there's a school shooting, we call a bunch of guys with guns to show up. Because they keep doing these intellectually dishonest arguments, because unfortunately the left has used every single opportunity they have, and I think maybe not all of them, but a lot of them, to exploit victims, to exploit students, because every time there's a school shooting, the first thing they go after is what? The Second Amendment. The Second Amendment. They want to take away your individual right to be able to defend yourself under the auspices that, and under that category, that the government will provide for your security. I'm sorry, I don't trust them to do that. The way we have to do this to go about to actually achieve real school safety is we need to empower localities to be able to make decisions for themselves. That includes some teachers with the proper experience, some teachers with the proper training being able to carry. Because in that circumstance, now when that person walks into a school, they don't know whether or not somebody's armed or not. The other thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that we're actually focusing on the things that we can work on together. So for instance, trauma-informed education. We have so many teachers right now that teachers are now expected to do everything. They're expected to teach, they're expected to be parents, they're expected to be disciplinarians, they're expected to be counselors. We need to make sure that we're equipping our teachers with the education and training they need so that when they can identify that a student might be a potential problem, they can intervene early on so we prevent this from happening in the first place. And I challenged the Democrats in a floor speech I gave a while back, right, that 30 million people saw, where I essentially said, do you want to focus on the Second Amendment? Because if you do, that's where we disagree. And I'm not going to surrender on people's Second Amendment rights. But if you want to focus on additional school security, if you want to focus on additional trauma-informed training, that's something we can actually work on to get something done. And as mad as I made the Democrats, a Democrat just came out with an op-ed saying, we got to get rid of the divisive rhetoric and focus on what we can do. Because sometimes you just got to call them out.
We'll have two more questions when we go. One regular and just one short question, and we'll go to your closing statements. The next question, we'll start with Delegate Freitas. Will you vote to go back to the original filibuster rules if elected to the Senate?
So I think, no, they used to call this, so this is interesting, right? When the Democrats are in power, they call it the nuclear option. If you go back to the old rules where you can actually force the debate, you can actually force a vote without the necessary 60 votes. But then as soon as they got into power, that's exactly what they did. So there's no reason why we can't do the same thing. We don't want to completely get rid of the filibuster, because the filibuster has been used in positive ways in order to prevent an overly active federal government from doing things that it shouldn't. But by the same token, we have absolute gridlock right now because the Democrats, again, they want one set of rules for themselves when they're in power, and then they want a different set of rules for us when we're in power. So when it comes to completely getting rid of the filibuster, no, that's a bad idea. But when it comes to adjusting the Senate rules on certain issues in order to force a vote, absolutely, I think we should take advantage of that. And again, I think that's the right course of action. So don't completely get rid of the filibuster, but definitely be able to push the vote when you need to in order to finally get things done in the Senate, which has been the gridlock right now.
Have you all seen this picture of boxing the way it used to be, like 100 years ago? And you've got this guy standing like this. It's the old way of boxing. It's called the Marquess of Queensberry rules. And in other words, when you're boxing, you're supposed to fight like gentlemen. Right? And that's the Republican Party today. The only problem is we're in a knife fight with the Democrats. Do you think for one moment that if the shoe was on the other foot, if the Democrats controlled the presidency, the House, and the Senate, that they would hesitate to do away with the filibuster in order to push through all of this left-wing stuff? They wouldn't. And you know why we know that? Because that's exactly what they did when they pushed through Obamacare.
Amen.
We have potentially a very, very short period of time here to right our nation after the damage that was done by President Obama and his left-wing cronies in the United States Senate and the House of Representatives. It could be a very short period of time. We have to do this. We have to correct the course of our nation. And sometimes that means getting tough. We have to get tougher. So absolutely, if I'm in the United States Senate, we're doing away with the filibuster and we're pushing through good, conservative legislation that's going to make America great again.
Thank you, Chairman Stewart. One last question before we go to closing statements, and this may be a question that's a one-word answer. So we'll start with Chairman Stewart. Of course, the primary will be on June 12th, and the Republican Party will select its nominee for U.S. Senator. So if you are not the Republican nominee selected on that day, will you support the Republican nominee?
Absolutely, yes.
Kelly Freitas?